Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We are in drum taps, and we now are working with Bivouac on a Mountainside, poem number 11 of the 43 of drum taps. I want to remind you that in an early poem in Leaves of Grass, To Thee, O Cause, that Whitman said, "My book and the war are one." And I've pointed out already in several conversations how really, there's never a war, right? There's always wars. There's always a multivariant kind of challenge. And here in some of these poems in this section of Drum Taps, we're beginning to see these images of what it's like to be dislocated from home, young soldiers out, in this case on a mountainside. Think about how mountains have already been referenced in Leaves of Grass, and the ways in which mountains are often considered as a symbol of a certain kind, right? So we're going to be playing that game here and looking at the images that are going to be represented. Again, as we've already said, photography was a new art form happening during Whitman's lifetime. He was enamored of it. He was blown away by it. And one of his challenges was to try to capture in poetic form what was happening with these photographs that were being taken. Now, the assumptions are that you've been following our stuff at learnstrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, and we've been working with everything from inscriptions on. We gave a set of introductory comments to drum taps, and we just finished with cavalry crossing a ford. Now, I want to remind you that in Song of Myself 33, we get a line that says, "I am a free companion. I bivouac by invading watchfires." And I want to remind you as well that in 1838, Longfellow had said in his famous Psalm of Life, "In this world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife." I think that the use of bivouac in this poem and then two poems later will be of some significance. Why? Well, bivouac's not home, right? It's not home. It's an encampment that takes the place of home. And to that degree, let's jump now to our Nortons. This poem, Nortons tells us, remained unchanged through all the editions except in 1871. The phrase in line 7, "studded with eternal stars," was revised to the present reading. And when we come to it, we will take a look at it, all right? Now, let's just enjoy the poem. Again, this is another one of those, sometimes readers call these photo poems, you know? So let's enjoy it. Bivouac on a Mountainside. "I see before me now a traveling army halting, below a fertile valley spread with barns and the orchards of summer, behind the terraced sides of a mountain, abrupt in places rising high, broken with rocks, with clean cedars, with tall shapes dingily seen, the numerous campfires scattered near and far, some away up on the mountain, the shadowy forms of men and horses looming, large-sized, flickering, and over all the sky, far, far out of reach, studded, breaking out, the eternal stars." Now, this is one of those little poems that in Leaves of Grass for me is kind of a treasure. There's so many things going on here, and I think Whitman himself is trying to find some sense of peace in the middle of what is really just absolute hell. That is, of course, the Civil War. Again, we're back to the I see formulation, which we have seen so many times already in Leaves of Grass. Before me, the use of the word now creates a certain kind of immediacy to this poem. A traveling army, we obviously think of the traveling cavalry of the earlier poem, and then halting. So we've got this pause. In other words, in the middle of the motion, all of a sudden pause. And then out of that, take one image, and then we're going to talk about it. I think Whitman learned this from his study of Homer, and if not Homer, then certainly from his study of Virgil. And what is it that we see? Well, notice, again, the proximity. Below, a fertile valley spread. Now, obviously, there's a literal reading and a metaphysical reading of everything of this poem. The fertile valley. Notice, looking out, everything is fertile. Everything is so predictable of growth. With barns in the orchards of summer. And obviously, we've seen this already several times in Leaves of Grass. The celebration of growth and orchards. And, of course, the barns. That idea of that which houses or holds on to the things that have been grown and harvested. And then behind, by the way, notice it's summer. Behind the terraced sides of a mountain. Of course, cut into the mountain. That is to say, the mountain is here going to be a powerful symbol. That is to say, you're up on the mountain and down you're looking. This takes us, of course, back to Song of Myself 46 when he leads the student up onto a little knoll and points out to the landscape and the road, the public road. And then the word abrupt, which is a strange word, because from halting we then go to abrupt. And it's almost like it just sits out in the middle of the line. Abrupt. In places, rising high. I told you guys about this in drum taps. Pay attention to the way in which the idea, or even the word and the idea of raising or coming up is always being played with. Rising high. And then notice the words. Broken, with rocks, with clinging cedars. I told you this thing in Leaves of Grass about the longing for holding on to something or clinging together, hugging is sometimes it. With tall shapes, dingily seen. It's an interesting word, dingily. That is to say, you can barely see, like what's going on. It's not clear. It makes us think, of course, of those opening lines of Macbeth, Act 1, Scene 1. Fair is foul, and foul is fair. Hover through the fog and filthy air. It's dingily seen. The numerous campfires, and we're going to have campfires referenced a number of times in drum taps, and they will be significant. Of course, there's an age-old motif that I think Whitman understood directly and indirectly, that in the human evolution, sitting around a campfire is a huge deal. Why? Because everything outside of the campfire is the unknown. And in the evening, of course, this is what you have. In the very early, probably, formulation of our kind, we will play that game. And what happens at the campfires? Well, if you've ever been around a campfire, and most of you have, right? It's kind of what? Lots of talking, joking, singing, exchanging stories, and somehow the fire becomes a symbol as well. So you got all these campfires out there, scattered near and far, some away up on the mountain, right? And then we're back to dingily with the shadowy forms of men and horses, and then again, from halting to abrupt, to dingily, to looming. It's a key word, I think, of this poem. Large-sized, flickering because of the shadows. And of course, readers of Plato's Republic 7 and the cave allegory and the shadows on the wall will find that it's interesting that in this line he uses the word forms, which is of course what we call that from Republic 7, the theory of the forms from Republic 6 and 7. I've given full lectures on that at learnstrong.net. Notice looming, large-sized, and then the flickering, which is of course going to be the campfires as well that will send these shadows. And overall, the sky. So notice from looking down, now looking up. And then the hyphen, and then the two words, the sky, with an exclamation point. In other words, you get this sense of distance, right? And place and time when you're looking down. And then you look up, and there's just like this eternity. We're obviously gonna get the word eternal here in a second. The sky. And then twice the word far. Far, and then it's interesting, far out of reach, the sky. Right. And then the only time that the word studded gets used in all Leaves of Grass is right here. And again, as we pointed out from our Nortons, a little bit of a change. Breaking out, which is funny, given that we've been flickering. Earlier in the last poem, it was fluttering gaily. Now we're breaking out, this idea of the halting with the abruptness. And now there's this kind of expanse, breaking out the eternal stars. Now, of course, this takes us back to Learned Astronomer, an earlier poem, and the idea that you can be told about the stars so you can see the stars. I think the significant word, though, here is the word eternal. This idea of what is it that's eternal? Well, the stars are eternal. Yeah, I know, but metaphorically, what are we talking about? Oh, man, maybe he is making the observation that it seems to be this human condition where we can pause for a moment, look at a fire, surround ourselves around the fire, and there can be this moment of recognition that even is kind of abrupt. But then this thing called history just keeps going, eternal. It seems to be happening over and over again. How you read this poem, whether you read it as optimistic or pessimistic, I'll leave up to you. But the word eternal here with the idea of stars, the inability to reach what one would hopefully want. Maybe for Whitman it is that idea of a peaceful democracy where we can resolve our conflicts without war and the like. At 2a, I think there's a lot of messages here. Obviously, one is that history is this eternal movement, right? With only momentary pausing or halting. But it's really not a pausing or a halting. In the same way that if you look at the flame as it's burning on a campfire, it looks like it's stationary, but of course it's actually in movement, right? I think that's a compelling symbol for Whitman, and we're going to see it several times in drum taps for obvious reasons. At 2B, all of the word choices here, and especially that, as we've pointed out several of them, but I just want to comment on that eternal word, this notion of it seems to go on and on, what it is that defines us in our human condition. At 3A, I haven't mentioned the great French poet Baudelaire, and yet for some reason he comes to mind for me with this poem. I've given several observations at learnstrong.net, especially on Albatross. But that great symbolist tradition of Baudelaire, I think Whitman had something to do with much of that tradition in the 20th century. And then finally at 3B, where do your eyes go in this poem? Like, where do they rest? Literally, you're like looking at a poem that's like a picture. Where do they go? What are the words that you find yourself, for some of you maybe it is that word dingily. It's kind of a strange word. It's kind of dingy. It's kind of, notice we've moved in the early part of Drum Taps where we're celebrating the blue uniforms and the bright colors, and now all of a sudden, yeah, everything starts to get a little bit dingy, because of course that's the way wars work. We start out all gung-ho, that's where the word comes from, right? Gung-ho and happy and excited as we parade and we, out of Manhattan, we let everybody go. But of course, there's the harsh reality of what night after night, you're not at home, you're bivouac, right? You're not at home, you're out on a mountain somewhere around a campfire, you're looking down, and then you're looking up. And in our case, we're obviously looking into Leaves of Grass. Thank you.